Hello there, welcome back to Dark Tower YouTube, where we're doing a deep psychological dive into Stephen King's magnum opus, The Dark Tower. My name is Michelle McEwen, I am your host, and I'm really glad to be back with you here for Chapter 2 of The Gunslinger, The Way Station. In this week's reading, we're going to meet a new character named Jake. We're going to instantly fall in love with him, learn that he comes from our own New York City, and get a flashback into Roland's past. Let's jump right into it, my friends. We're going to start with Roland in the desert, dying. He's not doing good this week. It's been a few weeks, I think, since he saw Brown in his hut, and he's just been traipsing across the desert, running out of food, running out of water, not having a lot of hope that this is going to work out. And as he is dying, stumbling to what he thinks is his death, he has a nursery rhyme playing over and over again in his head. King writes, "The rain in Spain falls on the plain. There is joy and also pain, but the rain in Spain falls on the plain. Time's a sheet, life's a stain, all the things we know will change, and all those things remain the same. But be ye mad or only sane, the rain in Spain falls on the plain. We walk in love but fly in chains, and the plains in Spain fall in the rain." He didn't know what a plain was in the context of the rhyme's last couplet, but knew why the rhyme had occurred to him in the first place. There had been the recurring dream of his room in the castle and of his mother, who had sung it to him as he lay solemnly in the tiny bed by the window of many colors. She did not sing it at bedtime, because all small boys born to the high speech must face the dark alone. But she sang to him at nap time, and he could remember the heavy gray rain light that shivered into rainbows on the counterpane. He could feel the coolness of the room and the heavy warmth of blankets, love for his mother and her red lips, the haunting melody of the little nonsense lyric, and her voice. All small boys born to the high speech must face the dark alone. So we're starting to get a glimpse into what a gunslinger is. The last chapter was just all going backwards out of the desert into where he had been. We knew that those guns were important, passed down from his fathers, very much related to his identity, Roland's identity, but not a great idea of what that really meant. But here we have the idea that little children are not allowed the comforts of their mothers in some ways. So not at bedtime. You must face the dark alone. Little child, no, you can't cry out for your mother. That didn't really work, though, because here is Roland in his moment of greatest need, calling out for his mother, thinking of his mother. So stripping the mom's love away from the little boys maybe didn't work as well as they thought it was going to work. We all want our mothers in times of trial and stress. We want comfort and nurturing and love and reassurance and closeness. And it's natural that this is what he wants. And I think we can all kind of relate to that. But we're going to pay attention because in this week's reading, this show's reading, we get a lot of the mom kind of energy, some female vibes that are in a way closer to Roland. So we had Alice in the last chapter with whom he did love on some level, but it was casual small town fling maybe. And then Sylvia Pittston, that female energy was a little different than the love and nurturing that I think Roland is craving here. So keeping our ears open for talk of his mother. He falls down. He's not doing well. After he skins his hands, the blood drips into the ground and kind of sucks it up. And it's after that, which I don't know, feels a little bit like blood sacrifice. We have, we'll be talking about sacrifice by the end of this chapter. So kind of paying attention to that as a theme, perhaps. And it's as soon as his blood is sucked up by the desert that he looks up and spots the way station. Coincidence? I don't know at this point, but we're paying attention. This is a in-between point. So maybe he's about halfway across the desert, hard to say. But it feels like a liminal space to me. The liminal space is something that is between here and there. It has to be crossed to get to the other side. And we'll come out the other side a little bit differently than when we went in. So a stopping point, a holding point, pause, regroup. That's what a way station is. That's what a liminal space is as well, in terms of a space of transformation. And it can be physical. It's also psychological. So we're going to talk about that because that's the lens that we're looking through in this show. And liminal spaces, if you go and look them up online, are always looking kind of creepy. There's a creepy vibe to them. They're usually desolate, isolated, quiet, and usually the lighting is a little stark, and we get a creepy feeling. And I think this has to do with the idea of we don't know what's going to happen next. If I go into that space, how will I come out the other side? Will I come out the other side? But something's going to change here. And so many of us won't go there psychologically because it's hard to kind of stop, pause, look at where we're at and how would we like to continue onwards, leaving behind what we don't need, taking with us what we do, maybe gathering something new for the rest of our journey, psychologically, spiritually. So the fear of liminal spaces, the creepiness of liminal spaces, it reminds me of religious traditions as well, where there's a holding pattern between the worlds, between death and between life. We are in purgatory, limbo, the bardo state. These kinds of pauses to gather stock of what our life was. What did we do? Was it the right thing? Was it what we were supposed to be doing? And taking stock allows us to move forward into the next life, whatever that looks like. Or maybe we have to go back and do it again depending on the tradition. And we know that in this chapter, Jake gets to the way station through death. Death is the door to the way station. So that makes me think a little bit harder on a liminal space of death, in between death and life. So think about it. Let it churn over in your head. We do have Jake Chambers here at the way station. John Jake Chambers is our friend. John is of Hebrew origin, meaning God is gracious. Jacob is a big figure in the Bible, the son of Abraham. The son of Isaac, who is the son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You hear that a lot in that particular religious, Judaic or Christian traditions. Jacob means to follow or be behind. It also means may God protect. So to follow behind. And we have this Jake following behind Roland as they leave the way station together later. So paying attention to that. The story of Jacob was a twin, Jacob and Esau, and Jacob came out behind Esau holding on to his foot as the second born twin. So he followed behind, and may God protect, he was given the birthright of Isaac. He tricked Isaac into getting Esau's birthright as the firstborn. So God easily tricked, I guess. And Jacob reaped the rewards of that, going on to become the leader of a nation. Chambers, well, we have the chambers of a gun, don't we? So that feels fitting without any further exploration. Let's get back to the way station where we do meet our friend Jake, and we're shocked, delighted, surprised to find that he is from our New York City, it feels like, of 1977. And he is going to talk about that. He can't remember too much of it, though. We don't know how long he's been here. He's counting the time by the amount of times that he's pooped. He says it feels kind of dreamlike. We know the man in black was here, and Jake hid while the man in black camped, and they had no interaction, and the man in black moved on the next day, and Jake just didn't come out while he was there. Roland is very interested in this boy because where did he come from? What does this mean? And the things that Jake is saying are not making any sense to Roland. And when Roland asks Jake's like, I don't know, I can't remember. It just feels like a dream. It feels weird. So Roland's going to hypnotize Jake into remembering, telling him more about what happened to him. What does his life look like? It is a hypnotism with a bullet on the back of his knuckles, a pretty cool trick. Feels like a little bit more than that, though. And I want to go back to our discussion of kef in chapter 1, where we saw that word for the first time and heard that it meant the sharing of water. And that is literally the sharing of water, but also psychologically, it's the sharing of minds, spiritually, extra-physically, kind of a telepathy-ish thing. If we're in this life together through fate or destiny, we can share our thoughts with each other. And that is also kef. When Roland arrives at the way station, he is almost dead. He's trying to shoot Jake. Good thing that didn't work out. But he collapses, and Jake saves him, probably saves his life by getting him some water from the atomically run water pump that has North Central Positronics stamped on it. Roland doesn't like that at all when he goes to look at that pump later, but Jake gets him the water, shares the water with Roland, also gives him some food to eat. And I don't know if Roland would have made it if Jake hadn't have done that for him. So that was a physical sharing of water, but now we're going to get this more metaphysical sharing of watery minds when Roland hypnotizes Jake and gets more than what Jake is saying to him. But before he hypnotizes Jake, or as he's preparing to, he is having some other thoughts, and his thoughts are going back to his mother once again, returning to her, singing a lullaby. So remembering his mother as this comforting, loving, nurturing presence, and she's singing, baby bunting, baby dear, baby bring your basket here. He's thinking of this, and this is where we get our first introduction to the Dark Tower. Yes, there is a Dark Tower in the Dark Tower series, and this is how Stephen King introduces the idea to us, starting with Roland thinking of his mother, remembering her voice, this calming lullaby. We're going to get the Dark Tower, and then we're going to go back to his mother. So the Dark Tower being introduced, bookended by thoughts of his mom. So let's read through this. King writes, not for the first time, the gunslinger tasted the smooth, loaded taste of soul sickness. The shell in his fingers, manipulated with such unknown grace, was suddenly horrific, the spore of a monster. He dropped it into his palm, made a fist, and squeezed it with painful force. Had it exploded in that moment, he would have rejoiced at the destruction of his talented hand, for its only true talent was murder. There had always been murder in the world, but telling himself so was no comfort. There was murder, there was rape, there were unspeakable practices, and all of them were for the good, the bloody myth, for the Grail, for the Tower. Oh, the Tower stood somewhere in the middle of things, so they did say, rearing its black-gray bulk to the sky. And in his desert-scoured ears, the gunslinger heard the faint, sweet sound of his mother's voice. Chusset, chisset, chasset, bring enough to fill your basket. That is our introduction to the Dark Tower. We have this beautiful mother figure singing lullabies to her baby, and in between, murder, rape, unspeakable practices. I don't like it. I don't like it. The gunslinger doesn't like it either. He is gripping that bullet so tightly and wishing that it blows up his hand, wanting the destruction of his hand because his hand is only good for murder. Remember, he was so indignant at the end of that story with Brown. What do you mean? Why would I be upset? Why would it be a problem to tell that story? When Brown said, "Do you feel better now?" Why would I feel bad, is what he said. He's feeling pretty bad right here. It is a feeling of this mother energy on either side of the Dark Tower, which we get some more masculine aspects of forcefulness, aggression, sandwich in between, and the Dark Tower is the center of it all. I don't want to go there. That's not where I'm picking for my summer vacation Airbnb. It doesn't sound great. Roland is kind of like, it's making me soul sick. I'm a horrific monster. So that's the Dark Tower. What are we doing with it? Well, in this chapter we learn that we think we might be trying to go there. So that's what that is. Also in that little snippet we get the Grail, mention of the Grail. So this Arthurian, I never know how to say that, legend of the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail is a chalice of eternal life, of forgiveness of all sins, of just becoming one with God. Everything that you want or need is found in this Holy Grail. It was supposed to be the chalice used by Christ at the Last Supper. There are lots of Holy Grail stories though, and it can show up as a plate, a cup, a stone. Even if you aren't too familiar with the Holy Grail, there's a great documentary called Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and I would encourage you to check that out so that you can learn more about legends of the Holy Grail. If you watch that documentary, you'll find that the knights are not successful in finding the Holy Grail and do get some trouble for their troubles along the way. The quest for the Holy Grail is a big deal. King Arthur is a big deal, and we're going to get King Arthur again in this chapter, so we're paying attention to that. In religion and philosophy and magic, the Holy Grail can take on another form of the Philosopher's Stone. And there's even a Grail myth where the Holy Grail is a stone where the angel's energy is residing. They're hiding from the battle of Lucifer or something like that. And the name of the stone is Lapis Exilis, which translates into the Philosopher's Stone. So we have this direct correlation between the Holy Grail and the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone was something that was believed to exist physically at one point, and it was a substance that could help change base metal into gold, change lead into gold. Spiritually, the alchemists who were after the Philosopher's Stone were also interested in one's psyche, in one's spiritual being, extra physicality, and being able to transform that lead, that darkness, into gold, into light. So inner lightness being reflected as outer lightness, as within, so without. So doing that magical work to change lead into gold would also be purifying their soul for the afterlife, eternal life, one with God. Same idea as the Grail, same idea. And the Philosopher's Stone shows up across all kinds of traditions as well, just as the Holy Grail does. It's a pearl in Buddhism, it's a jewel in Hinduism. So it's even mentioned in Harry Potter, and the Philosopher's Stone is what that film is really called. We don't know what the Philosopher's Stone is in the United States, and so they had to rename it for us dummies into the Sorcerer's Stone. But the Sorcerer's Stone and the Philosopher's Stone are kind of two different things. Philosopher's Stone is a big deal. So we're listening and keeping our ears open for more talk of Arthur and the Grail. Roland does hypnotize Jake in this kind of magical way, and Jake tells his story of being a boy in New York City in the late 1970s. He is very wealthy. His parents are rich. He's going to an exclusive private school for rich little kids. His dad, his father, is the head of a TV network, and he is a master of the kill. And he smokes 4 packs a day. I can't help but get some Roland vibes from that. A master of the kill. Now, we're not talking about with his guns. We're talking about TV ratings, but still. And then we have this smoking habit. Roland doesn't have 4 packs of cigarettes a day to smoke. Would he if he had them, though? I think he would. So some parallels there. Jake doesn't love his dad. He might even hate him. He hates all professional people. So the grown-ups in his world, he doesn't have a good opinion of. His mother is kind of distant from him. She's this rich housewife. King says she sleeps with sick friends. And dang, if that's not a great description of somebody to tell us pretty much everything we need to know about this person. She's not okay. She's not okay, and she's looking for love in all the wrong places, not getting it from her husband, giving love in the wrong way, not giving it to her child. It's kind of a mess. We feel bad for Jake. This is not a great home life or existence for him. With the exception of Mrs. Greta Shaw, that's their housekeeper, and she is the one who's giving Jake the most attention and love. That's the best that it gets for him, is the housekeeper who makes his sandwiches and cuts the crusts off like a cocktail party and just looks out for him and asks him questions, and he appreciates that. He talks about her quite a bit. So we notice that motherly feeling that he's not really getting from his mother, but from the housekeeper. So more of this mother talk, more of the theme of the mother, the womanly caregiver who nurtures our inner little children, is happening here. Jake was going to school one day, and he says the man in black pushed him in front of a car, and he got ran over by a car, and the man in black is saying, it's time for your act of contrition, and kind of giving him some weird last rites. And the car running over Jake is awful because it's such great writing. But Jake dies there in the street and wakes up at the way station. So that doorway of death between one life, and the next life was death for Jake. We heard about the man in black talking about the world next door. And now we think, if we know that Jake knows what he's talking about, we think that the man in black was there. And so he is moving between worlds, but presumably not dying. Like Jake died to get here. But the man in black saying the door, or the world next door, and now we're seeing him in two different places. How is he moving between these worlds? Not sure. But that is the story of Jake, and Roland doesn't know what to make of it. He thinks it can't really be true because no city like this ever existed, except maybe the mythical city of Lud. So we're just given more information about this is a different world, probably, or at least a world that knows nothing about New York City and is like, that's not real. And then we had a mythical city of Lud and we're like, that's not real. So is it feeling like two different worlds, more solidified at this point, based on the information that we have? Later in the day, Roland and Jake are talking about what's going on. And King writes, I guess you know I'm on the prod for that man you saw. Are you going to kill him? I don't know. I have to make him tell me something. I may have to make him take me someplace. Where? To find a tower, the gunslinger said. So we got the tower, and now we know that Roland is probably trying to go there. But he's not really sure, is he? He doesn't really know why he's chasing the man in black, which is interesting. He's been chasing him for a long time, so it seems, and isn't quite sure why or what to do with him when he gets there. He has to tell me some things, maybe take me to a tower. Okay, Roland. That's the best you can do, then that's what we're going to have to go with at this point. I wonder, though, about being very one-track minded, and we talked about that a little bit in the last chapter where Roland was just very defiant about it. Remember that? Where he was talking to Brown and out of nowhere, he's like, I do what I have to do. I go where I have to go. He didn't say I kill whom I have to kill, but he did kill all those people in pursuit of the man in black, and he doesn't even know why he's going after him. So just once again, kind of thinking about, wow, this feels pretty serious, but you don't even know. And maybe you're not acting the way that you would love to act. You're questioning yourself, questioning your guns in the first chapter. Now feeling like if this bullet exploded in my hand, good, because I'm not good for anything but murder. I don't like it. I don't like the Dark Tower. I like my mom singing to me. I don't really like the Dark Tower, but that's where it seems like we're going. So we'll just see what happens there. But we're empathizing with Roland on that because we can get stuck in that kind of one-track mind. I don't really even know what I'm doing with my life. I think I'm supposed to do this next. Why? Because my parents told me, society told me. What do you really want? And would it have to be a change in your identity to figure that out? Those are big questions. But those are the questions that we ask on this show. They're going to move on from the way station. The way station is this stopping point, this holding point, and they're going to move on through it. But first, they need some food. And there is a cellar, and Jake was afraid to go down there because it smelled bad, and nothing smells out in this desert. But this cellar did. Roland's not afraid to go down there, of course. And so he's going to go down and start bringing up cans of food that are down there, which is great. But as he's going up and down the ladder, he goes down, and all of a sudden things start to get spooky. And we get some horrific writing a horror scene here where the walls that are made of desert sand, part of the wall starts to pour out sand, and there's a groaning sound, and Roland is getting creeped out. And then there's a voice coming from inside of the wall. King writes, "Go slow," a dragging, clotted voice said from within the wall. And the gunslinger felt the dream-like terror deepen and grow almost solid. It was the voice of Alice, the woman he had stayed with in the town of Tull. But she was dead. He had seen her go down himself, a bullet hole between her eyes. Fathoms seemed to swim by his eyes, descending. Go slow past the drawers, gunslinger. Watch for the tahine. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. Wow. Okay. Why is it Alice's voice? A woman that Roland loves. He's been thinking of his mom, and now it's this voice of this woman that he loved giving him this prophecy. And we do hear at some point that only the dead can speak true prophecy. So we believe what is being said here, except it's a little cryptic and vague. Go slow. Okay, that's a direct order. Slow down. We got that. Go slow past the drawers. I don't know. Drawers, like, I just think of a chest of drawers, but it could be drawers, artists. I don't know. We don't know. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. I don't like the sound of that. That sounds bad to me. What does it mean, though? Well, I had to think about that this time around. And Roland is going to think about it too. But hold that thought for a second, because before he starts to think about it, he comes back up out of the cellar, and Jake had run away. When things started getting weird with voices coming out of the cellar, get out of town, kid. And he did. Roland comes back up, and Jake runs up to him crying. And King writes, "I thought it got you, that it got you. I thought..." It didn't. Nothing got me. He held the boy to him, feeling his face hot against his chest and his hands dry against his ribcage. He could feel the rapid beating of the boy's heart. It occurred to him later that this was when he began to love the boy, which was, of course, what the man in black must have planned all along. Was there ever a trap to match the trap of love? Roland is immediately loving this child, and he's already kind of connecting up this, your soul in his pocket. This is a trap from the man in black. It's kind of a bleak outlook, though, really. The trap of love. Do we all look at love like that? Love is a big fat trap. Some of us do. Have you ever been jaded with love? Have you ever had a bad experience, or more than one bad experience, and just given up on the whole thing and said, this sucks, that's a trick, it's a trap, not worth it, I'm not doing it anymore, there's nothing here for me, and just dismissing it in that jaded kind of way. I feel like that's what has happened to Roland, to be thinking of things like this. Was there ever a trap to match the trap of love? It's sad, because why can't loving this kid be a joyful experience? Now I have a companion, someone that I can help, someone that can help me, and I can train him, and we can have this relationship and go on together. He was put in my path. How wonderful. No, he was put in my path. It's a trap. I love him, and therefore it's a trap, and the man in black did this to me. And It's a very narrow-minded, sad way of thinking about love, in my opinion. Somebody who has also been jaded about love. And I want you to empathize with Roland there as well and think about what does this mean? It does feel like related to your soul in his pocket. That feels like a trap, the trap of love. So we're thinking, there's not clear answers here, but good questions to be asking ourselves. And Roland is asking himself these very questions. He's walking with the boy in the desert, and the way that Jake loves him very obviously disturbs Roland. He's not enjoying the fact that this little kid is looking up to him. So again, kind of sad, a sad way to look at things. And Roland's thinking about that voice. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. I want to think on this and go back to the beginning when we were reading that poem that was stuck in Roland's head. And the one line there at the end, we walk in love but fly in chains. I want to bring that into my theory of what this all means. Go slow. That's the one thing in that cryptic demon encounter that made any sense to us at all. Go slow. Slow down. Take your time. We have that idea of speed, though, already in that poem. Walk in love, fly in chains. Slower there is better. Walking in love sounds good. Flying in chains, not so good. This trap of love, the man in black has your soul in his pocket. Does he? Or is it because you're just believing that it is a trap, that you are trapped, that he did this to you? Is it just the way that you're thinking about it, Roland? The demonic presence, Ali, whoever, said that, so it's hard to say, but it does feel linked up with love. We've been getting this idea of love of the mother, and then love for this child, and then love of Jake for Roland, and Roland's viewpoint of like, this is bad. This is bad news. This is a trap. And then that idea of the man in black's got your soul because you are with this kid. What does it mean? Better, for better or worse? We will have to keep reading and see where this path leads us. Probably not by coincidence. We do have a change in the speed of things happening. So far in this book, Roland has been behind the man in black, way behind him, cold, dark campfires, not gaining any traction, catching up with him. But now that he has Jake with him, it seems that they are gaining on the man in black. And they start to see fresher campfires, and then they see maybe the smoke or the light from the campfire in the far distance. So feeling like we're gaining. Are we moving faster, or is the man in black slowing down? Roland is thinking of his teacher telling him, beware the man that fakes a limp. He wants to be caught. But we're going to pay attention to speed issues going forward in this book now. They're getting closer to the mountains every day, but they're still firmly entrenched in desert world. And Jake is doing amazingly well. For this little kid, we're told he's 11 years old. In the unrevised edition, he's 9, but Stephen King upgraded him a little bit older to 11 in the revised edition. He's still a little kid though, and he falls down. He gets heat stroke or something, and now Roland shares water with Jake. So that sharing of water between Jake and Roland, Jake saving Roland's life, and here Roland saving Jake's life, saying, slow down, pause. Every day at this time, we're going to stop and pause and rest. Good, I like it. Let's walk in love. Let's slow down. As Jake is resting, Roland starts talking about his childhood. He is remembering an evil man named Martin. And this is Roland talking to Jake as they're resting. King writes, "He was a wizard, like Merlin. Do they ken Merlin where you come from?" "Merlin and Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table," Jake said dreamily. The gunslinger felt a nasty jolt go through him. "Yes, Arthur Eld, you say true, and I say thank you." Another Arthurian legend popping up here, which gives Roland a nasty jolt, and he calls him Arthur Eld. So this is different than the Arthur that we know, and feels like a little more weighty on Roland's end of things, perhaps, but more on Arthur. So once again, looking and feeling for those kinds of themes in this story. Jake falls asleep, and Roland daydreams into a flashback of his life as a child in Gilead. This feels like King Arthur. It feels like it's a castle, it's green, it's lush, it's so different than the desert world that we've been in. We assume that it's the same world, but it's such a stark contrast to what we've been living in this story so far. Roland is a gunslinger in training. He has a friend named Cuthbert, and they're in a lesson with their teacher named Court. And Court is a name that comes from a lot of different places, but the German variant of the name Court with a K, which is a shortened form of Conrad with a K, means brave counsel. It can also mean short. It can also mean someone working in a manorial court. So all of those fit the court that we are introduced to here. He is their teacher. He is short and squat, and he is literally working in a courtyard where they train these gunslingers. He's kind of a brute, Court. These boys are working with David the Falcon, and Cuthbert has to release the falcon after the little bird whatever the bird that David is going to kill, but he's slow and he fumbles and it gets messed up. And Court just walks over and punches him in the side of the head, knocking him down and causing blood to flow out of his ear. So training to be a gunslinger is serious business. They are teaching these boys what to do, and if they are transgressing the rules at all, they're getting severely physically punished for it. And then they must say an act of contrition, which we get here. King writes, "I grieve," Cuthbert said in a voice of breathless control. "I have forgotten the face of my father, whose guns I hope to someday bear." So that's their act of contrition. And I can't help but notice that popped up with the man in black when Jake died. That's the thing that he was saying as he moved through the crowd, an act of contrition. So I don't know that means anything at all, but just picking up on that parallel use of language there. "I've forgotten the face of my father." Ooh, that's a good one. I like that. It feels weighty and big, and like I'm the worst because I forgot the face of my father. So whenever the boys mess up, this is something that they need to say to make things a little more right as a way of apologizing. Cuthbert, that is the way that you say that name. And this is due to the fact that later in the series, there's a character who is delighted by the way that you say Cuthbert's name. So we know that this is it. And if you were reading it as Cuthbert, as I did for many years, I'm sorry, it's Cuthbert. So I'm gonna say it that way because that's the name of this person, according to Stephen King. And David the Falcon, this is another biblical name drop. It is David from David and Goliath. That's directly written in there by King, and Stephen King loves the David and Goliath story. This is a biblical story, but it's evolved into mythos because everybody knows that story. Whether or not you have any familiarity with the Bible, you probably know about David and Goliath, the story of a giant named Goliath that nobody could take down. Of course, he was on the bad guy's side, and God's people, the good guys, couldn't beat this giant. But this kid, this child, teenager, same age as Roland-ish, same age as Jake-ish, is the one who is like, I'll do it. I can win. And he gets his Bart Simpson slingshot and he pulls it back, doink, and down goes Goliath. Of course it was because David was the son of God, a son of God, and went on to become the king of the nation, and good things for him, not so good for Goliath. But just another biblical drop in there. King really likes that story, and it shows up in multiple other stories that he's written, just a reference to David and Goliath. I read The Institute not too long ago, and it's featured pretty prominently in that book as well. If you're a fan of Stephen King, you probably know what I'm talking about. And I forgot to talk about Cuthbert is an Old English name meaning brilliant or famous. And as we will talk about in a bonus episode about the name Roland and Child Roland to the Dark Tower came, the poem, Cuthbert is a name in that poem as one of Child Roland's friends, companions who he lost along the way. So I feel like that's probably mostly where the name came from. Brilliant or famous, we don't know too much about this child. He seems like he's quick and funny, and he's a trickster, a joking kind of person. So not sure about that, but pulling it out of the poem makes some kind of sense to me. They're in trouble. They're not supposed to be eating dinner, but they go to the kitchen anyway, and we are introduced to Hax the cook. And Hax is this big, jovial man who loves the kids, and he's slipping them food when they're not supposed to eat it, and he's giving them extra pie, and people just like him. We like him when we meet him, and the children love him. They take their pie and they go eat under the stairs, and it seems like Ka put them there because they overhear this conversation. Nobody sees the boys, Roland and Cuthbert, but they overhear Hax talking to one of the guards in the castle, and they're talking about treason. They're talking about poisoning children in the next town over. The guard that Hax is talking to is where we'll kind of come in. Hax is reluctant about, he loves kids. He's not sure about poisoning the meat that's going to go to this town. King writes, "Ask not what the good man can do for you," the guard began. "But what you can do for him," Hax sighed. "Soldier, ask not." "You said it yourself, soldier, ask not. Do you enjoy seeing children under the rule of the gun, when they could be under his hands, ready to start making a new world?" And they refer to the good man. And that is a direct quote from John F. Kennedy's inaugural address. So we are probably all familiar with "ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." That's JFK. But here the good man is the one who's saying that, and these people who are living under the rule of the gun, that's the gunslingers. So your political ears are perking up and saying, what's happening here? We're assuming that Roland and the gunslingers are the good guys, but are they? And we have seen Roland having an internal struggle with his murdering nature, his murderous hands, questioning those guns, not wanting to become a monster by killing people. So he's been questioning his identity throughout this story so far. And now we're given a look into what's happening in that society where other people living in the society are questioning, are these guns good? The people who are ruling us with the guns. Maybe it's better. We have to poison a few children, but it'll get all of the children out from under the rule of the gun. And that's good. And it's a good man. And he's using JFK language. And what does it mean? Who are the good guys? I started wondering this when I read this book for the first time. And now I know that Stephen King enjoys JFK enough so that he wrote a book about him. So we should be kind of wondering, curious about what's really happening here and how good are these gunslingers. Roland is going to tell his dad what happened. So they just overheard this treasonous conversation, and Roland is going to go talk to his dad about it. And this is a longer quote from the book, but I'm going to read it because there's a lot in here that tells us, maybe not tells us what's going on, but is enlightening to learning about what a gunslinger is and who is Roland and how was he raised and what does it mean and who is his father's guns. I have forgotten the face of my father. We're introduced to Roland's father here. King writes, and this is Roland talking to his dad privately. It preys on you because you feel you've caused a man's death? Roland shrugged unwillingly, all at once not content with this probing of his motivations. Yet you told. Why? The boy's eyes widened. How could I not? Treason was... His father waved a hand curtly. If you did it for something as cheap as a schoolbook idea, you did it unworthily. I would rather see all of Taunton poisoned. I didn't. The words jerked out of him violently. I wanted to kill them, both of them. Liars. Black liars. Snakes. They... Go ahead. They hurt me. He finished, defiant. They changed something, and it hurt. I wanted to kill them for it. I wanted to kill them right there. His father nodded. That's crude, Roland, but not unworthy. Not moral either, but it is not your place to be moral. In fact, he peered at his son. Morals may always be beyond you. You are not quick like Cuthbert or Vinay's boy. That's all right, though. It will make you formidable. The boy felt both pleased and troubled by this. We're a little troubled by that scene as well. You want justice for treason? Nah, that's a stupid schoolbook idea. That's unworthy. But you want to murder these men because they hurt your feelings? They changed something in you? Yeah, it's immoral, but that's okay. That's okay that it's not moral. And in fact, you're probably never going to be moral, son. And I like that about you. That's a good thing for a gunslinger to be. So we're a little alarmed by this conversation and just looking into how Roland was raised and what was being shown to him as a good way to be. And it does feel troubling. And even at that age, he felt, oh, good. My dad is looking at me and telling me I did a good job and that maybe I'll be a good gunslinger. That pleases me. But he's also troubled due to, I think, the underlying weirdness of not having morals is good. That feels weird. And even that little kid Roland knows it. And this bigger adult Roland, he knows it too. At least somewhere inside of him, he's questioning all of these things. We're all a product of our environment. So if we want to take a psychological look at this and just say, how much of what I do is based on how I was raised? Have I given that any thought? Do I just do it the way that it's always been done in our family? It's a tradition. It's how I was praised as a child. I look up to these people for guidance and support, and I do what they give me to do. Does that mess you up sometimes? Does that make you feel weird sometimes? Does it make you question your identity sometimes? Probably, if you're like most people. And it's hard work because we've identified with that version of ourselves who has been programmed by parents, society, religion, culture, whatever. It's difficult work to kind of sit with that and look at it and feel uncomfortable with it. And then what are we going to do with it and have an identity crisis? Not a great time, but usually it pays off in helping us feel better and figure out who we really are without any of these constraints placed on us. They're going to hang Hacks, and the boys are going to go. Roland and Cuthbert are going to go, and they feel like they should go. They're gunslingers in training. This is something that they should be wanting to be a part of, to be these big, strong men that they're being trained to be. But when they get there, it's a little different, and they do feel like children to me, being placed into this grown-up situation that's a bit much for little kids to be witnessing the hanging of somebody that they loved. And as the hanging is about to happen, they notice the crowd siding with Hacks a little bit, and we do too. And Hacks is trying to make this speech about, I have not forgotten the face of my father. I am acting in good earnest, whatever. And they drop the trap in the middle of his talk, but not before the crowd is kind of murmuring in appreciation or agreement. So not everybody loves the gunslingers is a big takeaway from this part of the story. And we don't know how deeply that treason runs, how deeply those feelings run. The end of the flashback, King writes, "The land did not fall to the good man for another 5 years. And by that time, Roland was a gunslinger. His father was dead. He himself had become a matricide, and the world had moved on. The long years and long rides had begun." Okay, Stephen King. He had become a matricide. We were given a lot of mother stuff up front in this chapter, and we know that Roland has deep, deep love in his heart for his mother and is thinking of her and wanting her when he's at his worst moments. And now, just nonchalantly, Stephen King is like, oh yeah, by the way, he killed her. What happened? What happened? I suppose we will have to continue because he doesn't tell us in that sentence. We're getting back to Roland and Jake in the desert, coming out of the flashback. They're getting closer to the mountains. They see the man in black for the first time. They can see him scaling the mountain, and he's jumping around like a billy goat. It feels a little magical, not the way that a man might climb. King ends the chapter with this paragraph. He writes, "When they made their camp for the evening, the boy spoke little, and the gunslinger wondered if the boy knew what he himself had already intuited. He thought of Cuthbert's face, hot, dismayed, excited. He thought of the bread. He thought of the birds. It ends this way, he thought, again and again. It ends this way. There are quests and roads that lead ever onward, and all of them end in the same place, upon the killing ground. Except, perhaps, the road to the tower. There, Ka might show its true face. The boy, the sacrifice, his face innocent and very young in the light of their tiny fire, had fallen asleep over his beans. The gunslinger covered him with the horse blanket and then curled up to sleep himself. I don't like this at all. What has Roland intuited? There's a language parallel here. He himself had become a matricide. If the boy knew what he himself had already intuited. So just pulling that out. You don't have to say he himself, but he does both times there. And both times it's not a good thing on the other side of that. He himself. Roland has figured out that Jake is a sacrifice. How did he figure that out? Because that's how it's always been. It always ends this way. There's no other way for this to end. Again and again, it ends on the killing fields. Except perhaps on the road to the tower. Right, but isn't that where we're going, or where you're trying to go, maybe? So why does he have to be a sacrifice then? Is that definite for sure, for sure? Is that your intuition? Or is that your past experience influencing how you're thinking about the present moment? Are you letting yourself be a victim of circumstance, Mr. Roland? So we'll have a little empathy for Roland and notice when we do this ourselves, it's always like this. Why bother doing anything differently? I figured it out. Based on what happened before, this is what's going to happen next. In metaphysics, there's something called the law of cause and effect, and it is saying that cause, the realm of cause, is internal consciousness, psyche, thoughts, and the world of effect is the material world, and that what we think, thoughts are things, and how we think and what we think plays out in front of us. This is not just metaphysics, though. It's not just magical thinking. Cognitive behavioral psychology talks about the way that we think impacts our behavior. And you can change your behavior by changing the way that you think. So that's psychology. And physics also has some evidence showing that the way that we look at something, go to measure something, changes the way that it shows up. So this is not just a woo-woo, weird, magical kind of thing that I'm talking about. This is happening in all kinds of different fields of psychology, science, metaphysics. And I really want us to think about how Roland does this, how he's doing this right now. It seems like he's a victim of his past, and he can't see it differently. This is what happened, therefore this is what's going to happen. The end. Even though he's saying, except on the road to the tower. Yeah, that's where you're going. So couldn't this be different then? Don't you want to give that a little more thought? Perhaps we want you to give that a little more thought. But I want you to think about when you do this too. I'm thinking about when I do this too. It always ends up this way. Can I change my mind into something different? Maybe it doesn't have to be this way this time though. Can I see a different outcome? Is it possible for me to think differently about this? How can I go about doing that? And so on and so forth. So we'll end the chapter there by thinking about our circumstances and not wanting to be a victim of circumstance. And we will come back to read about the Oracle in the Mountain, which is chapter 3 of the Gunslinger. Thank you for being with me here today. Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me who you are. I would love to meet my Dark Tower friends. Tell me what you think about the soul of Roland and the Man in Black's pocket. Tell me what you think about we walk in love but fly in chains. What does that mean? Tell me what you think about Allie. Why is it the voice of Alice who is giving Roland this prophecy? What about the matricide? What about Jake now being referred to as a sacrifice? I'd love to hear any and all of that, or whatever you want to talk about. Until we meet again, my Dark Tower buds, long days and pleasant nights.